Hey guys, Richard Oldner here. Thanks for watching and thanks for supporting the channel. In our last two videos, we took a look at comparisons between the LS engine family and the big block Chevy. We look at them in part one, stock trim, and in part two, we stepped up to strokers, but I think we've forgotten something. What about the other guys? What about the Buick 455? It's known for torque. What about the 500-inch Cadillac? Also known for torque. And as always, what about boost? In this video, we're going to continue our quest for torque. We're going to take a look at our junkyard 454, and we're going to compare that to other motors notorious for torque production. I'm talking about the Buick 455 and the 500-inch Cadillac. Then we're going to answer the age-old question, if there's any replacement for displacement, is it boost? Hey guys, before we get going on this video, make sure to join me live nightly, 7 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. If you've got questions about any aspect, performance, cylinder heads, camshafts, any motor, doesn't have to be an LS, doesn't have to be a small block Chevy, can be a big block, can be a Honda. I've tested it all. If you've got a question, chances are I have an answer, or somebody else on the live feed also might have an answer. If you've got a question, remember, join us live, 7 p.m. live on YouTube. Let's get to our video. Okay guys, obviously we can't talk about torque production with any of these big motors, especially the factory ones, without bringing a couple of others into the discussion, namely the Buick 455, notorious for its torque production, and obviously the even bigger Cadillac 500. So let's jump right in and we'll continue the series that started with the LS versus the 454 and then the LS versus the 454 in stroker form. Now let's look at a couple of other big motors that are known for making lots of torque. So we've got our 454. This is a junkyard L29. Originally came fuel injected. We ran this one carbureted. We have many fuel injected combinations of this up, and we know that the factory fuel injected intake manifold, the long runner deal, makes a little bit more torque down low and a little bit less power up top than this. The curve is very similar, but if we take a look on our big block 454, we ran it with long tube headers, ran it with a dual plane intake, which works very well. A 750 carburetor and an MSD distributor, and run in this configuration our big block 454 Gen 6 motor, produced 370 horsepower, and more importantly for this discussion, 476 foot-pounds of torque. This is pretty indicative of what they do. Horsepower is going to be in the 470 range, and torque is going to be in the 470, 480 range for these when we get them from the wrecking yard, depending on how well they were taken care of. But now let's look at a comparison. How well did our Buick 455 do? So this is the Buick. Excuse me. The Buick 455 doesn't make nearly as much power. The peak power on the Buick, 308 horsepower. Torque was very good, as we've come to expect. 465, 466 foot-pounds. It did very well. But in all honesty, we're comparing a early to mid 70s Buick 455 in unknown condition. Basically, this motor was given to me, and we're comparing it to a much more modern 96, 97, 98, 99 big block Chevy. If we take a look, maybe a better example might be, it's hard to find any of the Mark IV stuff, but we certainly can find lots of Gen 5 454s in the wrecking yard. And the red here is the Gen 5 454. That is the throttle body injected, peanut port headed, hydraulic flat tappet cammed big block Chevy that predated the Gen 6 version. It still has a 4-bolt main block, which is good. It's got low compression. It has a small peanut ports. It has a very mild flat tappet cam. They didn't jump up to hydraulic roller stuff until the Gen 6. And it had throttle body injection. But like with the Gen 6, we ran this combination with the dual plane intake, 750 carburetor distributor, and our long tube headers. And you can see it made quite a bit less power, as we would expect, compared to the Gen 6. Peak power was only 445 horsepower. Our peak torque was 445 foot-pounds. Peak horsepower was 333 horsepower. And you can see that compared to that early previous generation 455 or 454, the 455 Buick actually made more torque than that version from about 3,400 RPM on down. So the Buick definitely very torquey. Now let's take a look at our final one. This is our Cadillac 500. And not surprisingly, it made more torque than all of them. 500 inches, it's a lot easier to move lots of air, especially down low. And it had over 500 foot-pounds of torque, 524, and was pushing 380 horsepower. But I have to say, it's important to note on this combination, this was actually the guy after the guys from the Cadco went through it. And they did a little bit of work to the cylinder heads. I think that they milled them a little bit. I don't think that they did any porting to it, but this thing did have a camshaft in it. It had a small crane camshaft in it. And I'll go ahead and try to look up the specs and put those up here so you guys can see that. So that's not really a totally fair comparison because the 500-inch Cadillac was modified. But we know in stock trim still, the 500-inch Cadillac is going to make more low-speed power, especially from 2,000 to 3,000 RPM. After that, its efficiency is going to kind of go away. It doesn't have a lot of cylinder head, but then, neither really does the Buick. We can see here that all of these big motors excel in low-speed torque production, but now let's see how they compare to something smaller. Now that we've taken a look at the difference between a Gen 6 and Gen 5 454, we even threw in the Buick 455 and then also the 500-inch Cadillac, albeit it was modified, so I'm sure we're going to get comments about that. But make sure that you do make comments because it's always interesting. Let's take a look and see what happens when we compare, and this is what everybody has wanted since we first started this series on the LS versus the big block and then the stroker stuff, and now these other motors. What happens when we add boost? So let's take a look. We have this. We're going to start off with torque because we have such a big disparity between the two. It gets a little confusing with the curves. So let's take a look at our torque curve of our Gen 6 454. We have 476 foot-pounds at 3,400 RPM, and it falls off rapidly. We're going to compare that to our junkyard 4.8 liter. This one had a small camshaft in it. Kind of a stage 1-ish cam. We'll go ahead and put the specs up here for you. But obviously, you can see, even with the cam, stock intake manifold, stock heads and stuff, are naturally aspirated 4.8. Not even in the hunt. I mean, it makes only 368 or 69 foot-pounds. It's making less torque than the Gen 6 454 is everywhere. They will actually, if we continue to rev the 454 out, they would cross, and the little motor would actually make more power than the big one does, but out past 5,500 RPM. So how do we get our 4.8 liter to make more torque? Well, obviously we add boost. So here's what happened when we got a single GT45. This was only at about a little over 6 pounds, 6.3 or so pounds. You can see it's making a lot more peak torque. We're up at 557 foot-pounds. But even down here around 3,000 RPM, the 454 is still making a little, excuse me, a little bit more torque, but not by much. But that's easily cured. All we have to do, obviously, we raise the boost a little bit. Here's about another 2 pounds, and then now we're making a lot more torque than the big block is. Another 2 pounds, and then another 2 pounds, bringing us up over 12 pounds. And now we're making over 550 foot-pounds, 580 foot-pounds of torque with a little bit of boost. And it's, the boost works like magic. And we could continue this actually down low. The reason I wanted to include this one is because we were actually using our electronic wastegate controller. So we had a nice steady boost curve. We even had boost on our loaded number, which was at 3,000 to 3,100. We could have loaded it earlier than that. And the GT45 on this slightly modified 4.8 liter was actually fairly responsive. So as we can see, and again, not a big surprise, boost is the equalizer for displacement. But you guys might be wondering, what about the big block guys? What happens when we add boost to that motor? Well, not surprisingly, if we treated the big block Chevy to the same thing that we treated the 4.8 liter to, it's obviously also going to make a lot more power. And I'll give you an example. Here's what happened when we added boost. This is about 10 pounds to a big block Chevy. It did have a stock bottom end. It was the one that we're going to use for the Big Bang 454. It had a camshaft. It had a decent set of heads on it, and in this case we put a single plane intake on it, which might hurt low speed power, but it was the EFI version that we had that we ran. But here it is at 10 pounds, and again, it's making obviously a lot more than the little 4.8 liter did, and we went up and boost again. So over 900 foot-pounds at about the same boost as we have with the 4.8 liter. So the thing is, both motors can make a lot of power. And the nice thing is if you go get an LS from the wrecking yard and do your typical cam and springs kind of thing in it, you can make a lot of low-speed power even with the 4.8. If I was building a motor to go tow with, I probably wouldn't pick a 4.8, and I was going to get an LS and turbocharge it, I probably would pick a 5.3. If you can find a 6.0, even better, because it's going to be more responsive. It's going to make even more low-speed power. And when you add boost on top of that, good things happen. Let's get to our conclusion. Okay, guys, what did we learn from this little adventure in our quest for more torque? Obviously, bigger is better. All of these big motors, the Gen 5 and the Gen 6 454, the Buick 455, and of course the 500-inch Cadillac, they all make lots of torque because they have lots of displacement. We also learned the following thing, and maybe we already knew this. Boost is definitely a replacement for displacement. If you take a small motor and start adding boost, it can make torque like a bigger motor. But that got me thinking, and we showed this a little bit in the video, what happens if we combine the two? What happens if we have a big efficient motor and more boost? Sounds like the perfect recipe. I'm Rich Holder. Make sure to like, share, subscribe, ring the bell, do all that stuff. More testing coming up.